Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. This is Deb Philman, mom, homeschooler, educator, bringing you another scoop from Christopher Rufo. As I said once before on this channel, I could do this all day. That's how many stories like this are pouring in. That's sort of the good news, that Chris is able to get whistleblowers to inundate him with information, and that whistleblowers actually exist, that there are people who want to get this information out. It's sort of sad that he has to do it. The parents aren't tuned in enough, and that there aren't more teachers getting up and walking out of these trainings, but here we are. All right, this one says, a middle school in Springfield, Missouri recently held a diversity training program that forced teachers to locate themselves on an oppression matrix and watch a video of George Floyd's last words. The whistleblower documents will astonish you. Let's dig in. Let's, at the risk of your sanity and mine, let's do it. The training at Cherokee Middle School began with a land acknowledgement claiming that Springfield Public Schools is built on the ancestral territory of Native Americans who had been oppressed by white colonizer violence. This is becoming a theme. Before every meeting at a public school, we have to acknowledge that we are guilty. So the purpose of this, understand, is not for you to actually really acknowledge anything, because there's no practical purpose. No one's going to be benefiting from this. There's no one there that you can even directly apologize to. You weren't directly involved, and nothing's going to happen other than you feeling negative emotions, guilt, frustration, anger, whatever it is. You're not supposed to feel good going into this training. They want to sort of soften you up to be progressively more uncomfortable, because when you are, you will look for ways to, bond with the people who are presenting you with this information, because you want the discomfort to stop. So the next thing that happened was the trainers forced the teachers to watch a 9-minute silent video of George Floyd's last words. As he points out, it's a cult technique used to overload the senses of the participants and create an emotional anchor that serves to justify subsequent political arguments with no debate. His last words were, "Don't kill me." Imagine sitting there for 9 minutes watching the words, "Don't kill me." It's brutal. It's brutal. And the part that really bothers me is I don't know anyone who wasn't appalled by what happened to George Floyd, but that doesn't necessarily translate to what happened next at all. So this is taking what we all agree on and presenting it as though there are people out there who don't. And to the extent that there are, and I'm sure there are a few individuals, they don't matter. That's how few in number they are. Next, the trainers provided a handout for teachers to locate Protestant males as the privileged social group or oppressors, and women, minorities, transgender, and LGBT people as the oppressed. Let's take a look at this chart up close. Oppression matrix. Type of oppression: racism, sexism, transgender oppression, heterosexism, classism, ableism, religious oppression, ageism, adultism. Privileged social group: white people, male assigned at birth, gender conforming cis men and women, heterosexuals, rich upper class people, able-bodied people, Protestants, and adults. So these are privileged social groups. It's basically, white males. Okay. I suppose if you're middle class or poor, you get to be in a border social group, right? That's where you're over here. You're in a border group, barely, by the skin of your teeth. And then, of course, the oppressed, female assigned at birth, but I don't fit anymore, because then I'd have to be over here in this group. This is what they mean by what is that term? Intersectionality, where all of your little identities intersect. I've never thought of myself this way at all. Breaking yourself into parts this way is designed to break down yourself, period. It's interesting that they have people in chains and they say oppression matrix. This is how you oppress people. Is by assigning people to groups like this, labeling them, othering them. This is literally designed to oppress. That's its entire purpose. This serves no purpose. This doesn't bring people together. This drives people apart. So remember something about the woke. Everything they do is the opposite of what they say they're doing. Every accusation is a confession. White supremacy, overt white supremacy, socially acceptable, and this is still under white supremacy. Socially unacceptable. Unacceptable. Lynching, blackface, swastikas, burning crosses, racist jokes, hate crimes, the N-word, neo-Nazis, KKK, and racial slurs. There's no question. I please go find me the people who aren't actually Nazis who disagree with this list. Okay, so yes, socially unacceptable. But this is the list. Covert white supremacy, that things that are socially acceptable. And these are all all debatable, with some of them putting you in a trap, an absolute trap. And I want to talk about that a little bit. Calling the police on Black people, education funding from property tax, school to prison pipeline, mass incarceration, BIPOC, which is a term that they made up, as Halloween costumes. So you can't dress up as Michael Jackson unless you actually are Black, or his particular shade of Black, since he was constantly bleaching himself to look more white, but, and altering his nose and other things. But no, don't you dare dress up as Michael Jackson. Prioritizing white voices as experts. You mean like Robin DiAngelo? You mean like her? That one? That white expert? Okay, just checking. Not believing experiences of BIPOC, English only initiatives, color blindness, white savior complex, racial profiling, school to prison pipeline. We said that twice. Treating kids of color as adults, discriminatory lending, hiring discrimination, blaming the victim, tokenism, tone policing, white silence, claiming reverse racism. No, not claiming, pointing it out. Racist mascots. That's pretty much everything at this point. All lives matter. All lives matter is white supremacy. If you say that all lives matter, that's white supremacy. Eurocentric curriculum. We live in a Western European culture. That's what made this country what it is. That's what made this country great. That's what made this country a place that anyone would want to come to from all of these other places for a better life. But no, apparently that's white supremacy. That's why so many brown people are desperate to live here, because they desperately want to live under white supremacy. Makes perfect sense. Well, let's take a look at some of them, like calling the police. What this is designed to do is not to get you to not call police. I think the initial reaction is, what, am I not supposed to call police? No, they know you're going to. They just want to be able to leverage that. They just want to be able to leverage that to indict you and make you guilty and make you a really bad person because you did the logical, rational thing, defended your own rights, and called the police. Now, does that mean you should call the police for every last little thing? I see a Black person walking down the street, I'm calling the police. If they want to qualify this and say like knee-jerk calling the police when you see a Black person, that's clearly racism or racial profiling. But calling the police on Black people, you mean like someone who's breaking into your house or trying to steal your car? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't care what color you are. I'm going to protect my rights. And that you'll be lucky if I don't just shoot you first, if you're doing those things. So, this isn't designed to actually get you to stop doing these things. It's just to leverage the instances when you do it indiscriminately. It won't matter whether you had a reason. It will not matter, as we have seen. We've seen that. Police who've, been called to a home where somebody is breaking in or beating on somebody or trying to steal a car with kids in it, Jacob Blake or whatever. And people call the police because they genuinely need help. There's a restraining order against the guy. And that action in and of itself and them showing up is considered white supremacy. No, they should have left the woman to have her car stolen with her kids inside. That would have been preferable. They know you're going to do it. They just want to be able to tell you're a bad person and leverage anything that happens thereafter against you too. It's all about getting ammo. And like I said, the hypocrisy, prioritizing white voices experts, they do it all the time, constantly. It just has to be their approved expert. And they will turn around and dump on somebody of color who's also an expert on these things, like Glenn Lowry or John McWhorter or, Thomas Sowell or Shelby Steele. They will absolutely call them Uncle Toms, call them, coon, call them terrible names, even though they are Black. So they don't even want Black experts in these issues. They just want their experts. And it really doesn't matter what color they are. So they will accuse you of putting white voices first, and then they will take a Black voice and say that's also a white voice because they're just internalizing whiteness and white racism because you agree with them. So you're caught. It's a Kafka trap. Discriminatory lending is illegal. It's literally illegal. But they're using that term now. They're repackaging credit scores and calling it discriminatory lending. There are plenty of people who are not of color who have poor credit scores and they don't get loans. Okay. I would prefer to see them put predatory lending because we've seen instances of that where it's so easy. They now have policies in place in many banks that say you must give out. I mean, the government's looking over their shoulder every single second, telling them you're not giving out enough loans to people of color. So now we have predatory lenders who are going, I need to meet my quota. It doesn't matter. They're not credit worthy. Now you're hurting the person. If they can't pay the loan back, that's predatory. Blaming the victim is code for holding people accountable. Tone policing is in any way, shape, or form asking for civility from people of color. If you don't feel like being cussed out, called names, threatened, harassed, etc., you're tone policing. White silence. Do you want to just live and let live and move about your life and not participate in any of this and leave people alone to fend for themselves and you aren't asking anything of them? That's white silence, which also, by the way, is violence. So they're mixing in a bunch of things. They're mixing in things that should just be common decency, common sense, Western culture, and they're mixing it in with this covert white supremacy. They're continuing to expand the definition of it. All right, well, let's continue, shall we? All right. Luckily, one white teacher who was raised by a black stepfather pushed back, blasting the training as an indoctrination in Frankfurt School cultural Marxism. So let's take a look at what this one teacher said, to their credit. While I don't think there's a person in the room who doesn't agree that this is an important topic that should be dealt with, the way that it's being framed comes from Herbert Marcus, who took and stripped all of the economic policies of Marxist theory and turned it into a cultural Marxism. I grew up the son of a black man. He raised me to believe in Dr. King's teachings. Dr. King did not teach the kind of vitriol that we see out of Marxism, which has a long, replete history of countries being bigoted and prejudiced against others and then murdering millions as a result. China, case in point, terribly racist against blacks. They pretend otherwise. They look down their noses at us. But what they do in their country to the Uyghurs, and what they do if you are a black person, even an American, and you go visit there and you want to go into certain stores, they will tell you can't because you're black. So, and that's communism. Moving right along, I think he means the instructor initially admitted they were teaching a version of Marxism and then quickly denied it. But the truth is simple. Critical race theory is the reformulation of Frankfurt School Marxism and has now spread from coastal cities into the heartland. He links to an article I will link in the description section. Now let's take a quick look at Herbert Marcus. This is from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Here he is. This gentleman was born in 1898, lived to 1979. This is all his biography. I'll put a link to this as well. But I want to specifically scroll down to the part where we have the search for a philosophical foundation for Marxism and the radical subject. Okay, so inspired by his readings of Heidegger's Being and Time and having already been influenced by Marxism during his military days, Marcuse went to Freiburg to study with Heidegger in 1928. Between 1928 and 1932, he attempted to develop what has been called Heideggerian or Phenomological Marxism. This project was Marcuse's response to what has been called the crisis of Marxism. What that means is people were abandoning Marxism. It was not really, he didn't want to adopt it. It wasn't taking off. It wasn't flying. He didn't, what? Oh, we must make it palatable. We must make it accept this is the crisis. By the early 20th century, it appeared to be the case that the proletarian revolution predicted by Marx was not going to happen. Yes, because it's not a good thing. Europe had witnessed several failed attempts at a revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 was not led by the proletariat, and it simply produced a different form of totalitarianism because that's inevitable. That's inevitable because humans are going to be humans. And when you give a human the kind of power to make these kind of decisions over other people's lives and you empower the state, you will end up with a few individuals who take over that power because they can. That is, and it will happen no matter how many times you try it. Cuba, Venezuela, China, North Korea, how many examples do we need? Okay, so this is the guy. For Marcuse, radical action was needed to overcome the oppressive, repressive, and reified structure of advanced industrial society. He saw common ground between Marx and Heidegger, blah, blah, blah. You can read this yourself. But this is a guy who was not poor himself. He did not personally have a reason to be doing this. This is a hyper-intellectual person who wanted to be the grand savior of Marxism. And most of the Frankfurt School went back overseas to Germany after Hitler was done away with. But this guy stayed. And unfortunately, so did many of his ideas. What I want to do now very quickly is show you something that will probably terrify you if you haven't already seen it. Many of you may have already seen it. This is former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov warning America about socialist subversion 34 years ago. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's 13 minutes long. But there are a couple of key points that I want to play. Okay, so here we go.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage, intelligence gathering, looks more romantic. it sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
And what have we been talking about? The inability to see truth, the inability to use reason, schools that are actively trying to make it impossible to do. I don't even know if the teachers doing it right now realize what they're doing because they've been educated like this for so long. And he talks about that a little bit.
It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s
Now, I'm going to stop there because I want to skip over to this next point, but where we are right now is we are at the end of the demoralization phase. It's been done. And now he felt it was already overdone back 34 years ago. I would agree with him. I think we've just been like sleepwalking through it and watching it get worse and worse and more pervasive. But that's where we are. So now I'm going to take you to listen to what he says about that, and then we will conclude so I don't completely ruin your day. I hope this is right.
The process in the United States is basically completed already.
The demoralization process.
For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom.
And I think we all know that we are well past that point. And obviously there are people like myself and many of you who see it. And he touches on that later in the video, and I will put the link. You can watch it for yourself because the interviewer asks him, well, what's to be done? What can you do, even if we're already past this point? And it's pretty much what I have been saying, the purpose of this entire channel, that when you walk away from their indoctrination, you don't allow the next generation of children, don't allow them to have another generation so that you can increase the number of people who think as we do, who use critical thought, who use reason to make decisions, who look for truth, who crave truth, who are willing to find it even if it contradicts what we think. All of that, okay? We need to create more people like that. And the way you do that is not to put them in a system that is doing what he's describing, that's perpetuating it across the next generations. We have 4 and 5 and 6 generations. By the time, the public schools completely fall apart and become re-education centers for dissidents, it's too late. It's too late. By that point, they've outlawed, homeschool. They've outlawed everything. You've become a Soviet state or a top-down state. You can't homeschool in China. I don't know how much time we have left. Don't ask me questions I can't answer. But while we can do it, we must do it. This is how we save the country, is one child at a time, one family at a time. If you recall, when this country was founded, our founders were a small number of people, a small number of very well-educated people and lots of farmers, many of whom didn't agree with him, wanted to be left alone. What's wrong with the crown? The crown is fine. The crown is our daddy, whatever. They were able to persuade them to fight for their own land and fight for their rights because they had a good message. They were able to reach enough people with their better arguments that it worked. We don't need a majority. We don't. We just need to stop giving more people to this system. We need to stop sleepwalking through this, pretending it doesn't affect us. We can't do that anymore. You can't sit there at home and think, surely they don't really want us to become the Soviet Union, do they? Surely they don't. Well, even Russia isn't the Soviet Union anymore. No, it's just an oligarchy. It's so much better. Surely this, surely that. Stop saying these things to yourself. Stop deluding yourself. I know it's very difficult to believe that people would want to do these things and people want absolute power, but it's happened already. Why is it so difficult to believe? So anyway, if you like this sort of content, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, and that's the video.